The year is 1990, and this is really the start of the pickup horsepower wars. And I have to say that I think Chevy is the one that gets credit for really kicking this off. Before this time frame, pickups were really just used to tow things around, and you could certainly option them with higher performance engines, but they really weren't thought of as performance vehicles. They were just thought of as kind of things to tow stuff around or haul cargo in the bed, very functional pieces of machinery. Now, pickups today are obviously very, very popular with customers for a number of reasons, many of whom don't even use the towing capability or the hauling capability in the bed. They just simply like the ride and comfort, and now with the large quad cabs or four-door pickups, they have a lot of room inside as well, and they offer good residual value, so the lease payments are quite cheap. But again, back during this time frame, people usually didn't think of pickups as daily drivers unless you were somebody who had to use the functional capability of a pickup. And so kicking off these horsepower wars really started pickup trucks in a completely new direction, and that was something that kicked off with the 1990 Chevrolet 454 SS that you see here. Now, based on the nomenclature here, you can probably guess what was special about the 454 SS, and that was what was under hood, Chevrolet's big block in a light-duty pickup body. In 1990, it made 230 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about the fact that Camaros, as an example, and Firebirds were offering something in the 230 to 250 horsepower range at this time, well, that's pretty gosh darn good, especially when it comes to a pickup. So you got the 454 big block, 230 horsepower, and amazingly, for 1990, you got a 3-speed automatic. You still didn't have a 4-speed automatic when you got the big block Chevrolet. I would guess that Chevrolet was just a bit wary about the 4-speed automatics that they had, the 700 R4 being able to take the 454's torque, especially in the event that you were towing anything. So you had to get the heavy-duty 3-speed automatic. Now, the 454 SS would run from the 1990 through 1993 model years, and about 17,500 were made. But most of those were 1990 models, although in 1991, you did get more horsepower. The 230 horsepower went up to 250 horsepower, and you finally got the 4-speed automatic in 1991. And as a consequence, Chevrolet put shorter gearing in the rear end, numerically higher or just shorter overall for faster off-the-line 0 to 60 times. And you got a 410 gear, I believe, in 1991 through 1993, and it was a 370 rear-end gear in 1990 because you only had those 3 speeds in the automatic slush box. But with your 454 SS, in addition to the black paint, you got blacked-out trim up front, that red Chevrolet badge, red badging on the side, big decals like you see here on the side of the pickup, and a big Chevrolet decal on the tailgate. Now, this particular pickup was introduced for the 1988 model year. Chevrolet redid its previous, let's just call it old and aged generation of pickup in 1988, and it did so with this handsome front end. And what's amazing is when you take a look at this particular pickup and you see how small it is compared to today's pickups, you kind of wonder what happened. This pickup could tow quite a bit. It can't tow as much as modern vehicles, but I kind of wish pickup trucks would start getting a little smaller. I have one, actually. I have a Silverado. That's my daily driver in the winter. And, well, it's just a little too big. I wish that it had all the same capabilities, but in a slightly smaller package. And I think that's one of the great things about these so-called GMT 400 pickups. Even the 800s are relatively small, seemingly, compared to today's pickups. Now, one other important thing to note about these new pickups when they came out in 1988, this was really the first generation of General Motors pickups that went through wind tunnel testing and extensive aerodynamic testing. And it really shows in terms of the overall smooth surfaces on the front end here. You have that leading edge of the hood that just kind of wraps a little bit up as it goes toward the windshield and then curls under as it meets the grille. You have these beautifully integrated mirrors, and there are no more drip rails surrounding the windows to protect the rain from getting inside the truck. All these things were done to minimize wind noise and also help with the aerodynamics on this truck. And I think designers did such an excellent job. These GMT 400s, I think, still look great and contemporary, despite the fact that they were really designed in the mid-1980s. You wouldn't guess that the design of this truck really is 40 years old, but it has held up so well. Like I said, you could put this in the showroom today, and I think people would buy it, but for the fact that it's, let's just say, significantly smaller than today's pickups. I did previously mention all the decals that you got, and here you can see the decal package that came with the 454 SS on the side of the bed as well as the tailgate. It was overstated and blunt. You clearly knew what someone was driving. Some people took these decals off to have a bit of a sleeper, but anybody would know it was a 454 SS because of the paint scheme as well as the blackout trim. Notice the blackout bumper. You didn't get a chrome bumper. And then you got these wheels as well that were standard with the 454 SS. The 454 SSs also came pretty well loaded with power goodies and even that sliding rear window that was popular during the time. Note there were no extended cab 454 SSs. There were just these standard cabs. And back during this time frame, extended cab pickups really were not all that popular for the reasons previously mentioned. If you had one of these as a work truck, you weren't hauling around your family in it. You were really just using it to tow things. Now, as we go into the interior of this pickup, remember again that this was designed in the mid-1980s, and this interior is pretty revolutionary for that time, and I think, again, looks good today. Now, a number of things were different versus the previous model on the interior. First, notice on the dash you have needleless gauges. I don't know why Chevrolet decided to go in that direction, and a lot of customers complained about these gauges. We'll see a close-up in a minute in terms of them being hard to read. They did refine them a little bit by 1990 versus the original gauges in 1988, but they still weren't all that great in terms of their legibility. People just wanted simple speedometer needles, and those would eventually come back to the full-size pickups for Chevrolet in a few model years. The other thing to note here is that the interior designers really tried to make sure that every single thing that you touched, you could operate with a glove on, because many pickup truck drivers were driving these in the cold weather and they had gloves. So take a look at the buttons there underneath the left side vent. That's for the headlamps and the parking lamps. You can see how large they are. The climate control buttons are also very large. The radio buttons and the preset buttons are very large. That was purposeful, and that was done, like I said, to make sure that you could operate them all with a gloved hand. Even the power window switches and power lock switches that you could see on the door panel were quite large, and it was very functional. This was also the first General Motors pickup with electronic controls. The HVAC is not that simple slider bar that GM always had in the 1980s, where you just kind of move it left to right for hot or cold or to operate a different function on the climate control panel. Here, this was all done electronically through this electronic panel, and it worked very, very well. And here's a close-up of these needleless gauges. You can see that there's just this wheel that kind of spins, and it does have a red marking on it to denote what the actual value is associated with the gauge. Like I said, customers never really got used to these needleless gauges, and they would be out in relative short order, and Chevrolet would revert to normal gauges, which I think most customers liked and wanted. Just something simple that was easy to read. And for a last shot of the interior, I just wanted to show the bucket seats that you can see. These were cloaked in Silverado trim cloth, the upper end of the Chevrolet trim line. And these were actually shared with the Chevrolet Astro. So GM used them in a number of vehicles aside from the 454 SS. One of the great things is that these trucks are not only quite powerful, they would go 0 to 60 in just under 8 seconds, about 7.7 seconds. The 1991 and later models were a little bit faster because of the shorter rear end, but they were also very comfortable and quiet. And here we have the underhood department of the 454 SS. This was really just a standard big block Chevrolet V8 that they put into the light-duty pickup. And as I previously mentioned, made 230 horsepower in 1990, 250 horsepower in 1991 through 1993 on the 454 SSs. Part of the reason for the low horsepower was that these were outfitted with throttle body injection, which was really a great setup from a reliability and durability standpoint. I don't think I've ever had an issue with the injectors or anything else on a vehicle that I've owned with GM throttle body. They really did a great job. You basically could convert a car easily from a carburetor to fuel injection, use this setup, and it would work extremely well, but it just wasn't that great in terms of overall horsepower. Now, as I mentioned, this 454 engine really would kick off the horsepower wars, although it really didn't have anything special. So it was a just standard 454 cubic inch V8, but GMC would continue this pivot into the horsepower wars with the Cyclone and the Typhoon, the all-wheel drive 4.3 liter turbocharged V6 pickup and SUV respectively, that would go from 0 to 60 in a little over 4.5 seconds to a little over 5 seconds, depending upon which model. The Cyclone was a little bit faster than the Typhoon, but not quite sure who GMC's general manager was during this time frame, but somebody must have been punch drunk on performance. Maybe they were formerly the Pontiac general manager and got pushed into GMC, or I can't remember if by this point Pontiac and GMC were managed as one unit. Regardless, somebody at GM was certainly pushing performance specific to the GMC brand, because Chevrolet really kind of just trotted along during this time period with the normal pickups. So it must have been someone at an upper level in division management at GMC who was really helping to improve the performance and street credibility of the GMC brand. Before we close out this video and the under hood shot, I wanted to make one other point that you can see here under hood. If you take a look at the master cylinder, you'll see a little box that's on the driver's side of the master cylinder, and that's because the 454 SS actually had anti-lock brakes. Now, the interesting thing about this is today we think about anti-lock brakes being as four-wheel anti-lock brakes, very common on cars. This was a rarity on pickups to have anti-lock brakes during this time frame. And the very interesting thing and the very GM thing about this, it was not four-wheel anti-lock brakes. It was only two-wheel anti-lock brakes, only on the rear wheels. So you did not have anti-lock on the front. You only had anti-lock on the back. It kind of made sense in a pickup because the bed is so light when it's unloaded that the rear wheels would have a tendency to lock very prematurely. And so overall, I suppose that generally made sense. Of course, you could still lock the front wheels, but the rears were just so much easier to lock given the relative lack of weight back there, that I think General Motors decided that they didn't want to go all in on the anti-lock because it would cost too much, but they wanted to at least give something to customers that would help provide incremental safety. And, the rear wheel anti-lock solution was probably not a bad one overall. So there you have it, Chevrolet's 454 SS pickup that kicked off the horsepower wars in this particular category. And here you see it parked next to a, I believe, 1993 Ford Lightning. Ford would introduce the Lightning in 1992 as a response to Chevrolet's 454 SS, but you couldn't get a big block in the Lightning. You could get a 240 horsepower, 351 cubic inch Windsor V8 under hood. So it did have similar horsepower. It didn't quite have the torque that Chevrolet's big block had. But from this point forward, the pickup trucks just continue to escalate in horsepower. It's kind of funny to me that my four-cylinder Silverado, just a base truck with a 2.7 liter four-cylinder, has more power than this big block Chevrolet 454 SS and is faster as well. My Silverado is 310 horsepower and has over 400 pound-feet of torque, which is something that even the big block 454 didn't have. I think it was 385 pound-feet of torque back then. So pickups have come a long way. I do wish, though, they would make them a little bit smaller, as I mentioned. But what do you think? Do you want a smaller pickup that's just as capable? Do you want something else? And what do you think of these Chevrolet 454 SSs? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.